And with no intro, just raw, it's three women today on CIET 89.5 FM. And we have a special show, and I want to give a special shout out to Dietrich for really jumping in as our tech this morning. Phenomenal. Thank you so much, Dietrich. But particularly our special guests as well. We have in the studio live, very, very live this morning, Jeff Perera from White Ribbon Campaign, who is community outreach worker there. And we have Bonnie Levine, who's the Executive Director of Victim Services. And of course, you know what we're going to be talking about, especially since Jeff is the very first man ever on Three Women, because we've always wanted to highlight women. But we thought this is a special occasion. We really want to hear from you, Jeff, because what are we talking about? What everybody's been talking about for the last month or so, and that's the situation that all kicked off with the revelations about Jian Ghomeshi at CBC. And then, of course, women just coming out of the woodwork, talking about their own experiences with sexual violence. And, of course, the discussion was, why do women not report? We've got Antonia Zerbisias, who's going to be speaking to us online too. She invented a hashtag that went viral around this, women all over the world coming out and talking about their experiences with sexual assault. And my response to that, and I'm interested in your response, by the way, because this is live, so you can always call in at 416-946-7000 or tweet me at CHERIDINOVO, your host, Sherry DeNovo, MPP Parkdale High Park. What I'm interested in is not why women don't come forward because they're coming forward about men they love, respect, or fear. It's pretty understandable why they don't come forward. It's why are these men attacking women? So, Jeff, that's why you're here. It seems like an intractable problem. So weigh in for us and please shed some light on this.
Well, first of all, good morning and thank you for having me, and honored to be the first male person on the show. It's a very heavy question as far as what makes men, not all men, but some men, act in this way, and as far as behavior and attitudes that devalue women to the extent of physical, sexual violence. I think it's important to note that not all men are on that end of the spectrum, but that most men are good men doing nothing about the issue. So it's time for us as men to really recognize how much more we can do and that we can do better around this piece. As far as the construction of these men and why these things are happening, I mean, it's a question around how we create ideas of manhood and more toxic ideas of manhood that are traditions handed down throughout societies and different cultures and spaces. And what's the commonality is that this narrow idea of being a man means being tough, strong, having all the answers, being in control, and devaluing anything that's deemed feminine, including women and girls and their lives to the extent of erasing them off the planet. And I think it's important to really think about what most men can do to help change this. And obviously we talk about being strong, positive role models. At White Ribbon, we want to focus on the roles that men and young men can play as role models, whether it's fathers or father figures, being involved and engaged in how we raise our young men and boys to be men of respect and honor, and men that value the lives of women and girls, and also men that don't speak in a language of violence. One of the things I always say is you have so many men who are fluent in the language of violence, and that's a big part of the problem. I mean, it's a huge conversation. I don't want to monopolize all the time in the answer, but it's a big piece that I think the work that we're trying to do is proactively look at creating a generation of men that are a part of change and encouraging men today to really recognize the role they can play around these issues.
And we're lucky enough to have Antonia Zerbisias on the line. Welcome, Antonia, to Three Women. How are you?
Fine, thanks. How are you, Sherry?
And congratulations on your retirement. We followed it on Facebook. So, Antonia, award-winning journalist, just retired from the Toronto Star, among other things that she's done in her life. And also you invented a hashtag that went viral. Talk to us about that. What was the hashtag and what happened?
Well, first of all, I co-invented it. Sue Montgomery, Justice Crime Reporter for the United States, for the Montreal Gazette, Facebook messaged me saying that she was furious that the women who had accused Jian Gomeshi of various forms of abuse, there goes my dog, he may bark, were not being believed or were being challenged. Why didn't they report it if it was so bad? Why didn't they go to the police? Why didn't they, that kind of thing? And she just kind of was outraged. And she said, let's start a list and pass it around, and I'll sign it, you'll sign it, and let's get every woman we know to sign it, correctly assuming that I had shared experiences that she had. And then I said, well, social media, Facebook, Twitter, and then I just tweeted it out. Been raped, never reported. And the rest is explosive history. It's been more than 50 million impressions around the world. It's been translated into other languages. Sue is being run off her feet in Montreal doing French language media. It's just been incredible.
Where do you see this going? What next for that?
Well,
initiative?
a lot of people have asked us that, and we hope that other people, we're journalists, we're writers, we're not, social workers or counselors or, in the social services. We're hoping that other people pick up, the torch, so to speak, and do something with it, whether it's, agitate it with the police to make sure that, women are properly treated. By the way, in Toronto, I think it's a lot easier than in some other places because in Toronto we have a police force that's trained to deal with sexual assault, whereas it's not the case in other jurisdictions. And, to support women with legal resources, to if you decide to go to court, for example, you're going to be going to court a lot of times until there's an actual trial. Before I left the Star, I was following a case where a young woman was, I'm going to say, without doubt, sexually assaulted because it was caught on a security cam video. And as far as I know, it hasn't gone to trial yet because there have been so many, well, can we admit the video, can we do this, can we do that? So it just gets put off, and at a certain point, a woman will say, you know what, I'm missing too much work, this is just dragging on, I can't do this anymore. Mm-hmm. And then even if she does get to the stand, so there should be legal resources to help a woman, to support a woman, counseling, that kind of thing. But as I said, that's not for Sue or I to do, it's for others to do.
And you're one of those others, Bonnie Levine. Bonnie Levine, Executive Director of Victim Services, largest in the province, and you're there first when this happens. So just to segue from what Antonia said, what happens to women when they report?
We know, and in our experience, violence against women in terms of sexual assault and domestic violence is so underreported. Women can come to us for support without having to report to the police, and we don't report to the police. We're a separate organization. It's Victim Services Toronto. There are victim services agencies throughout the province. One of the great things that this hashtag has done is, because we know it's such an underreported crime, that you stand up and say, it happened to me, it happened to me, it happened to me. And so many women are coming forward that we are seeing as a society how widespread abuse of women is in our society, in our culture, and our many cultures. Right? This goes through many different cultures, and we are a multicultural country. So, but it's everywhere, and it's so systemic, and it's so widespread. And when you see violations happening against a particular group over and over and over again, you know that there are systemic issues at play, and that there are underlying beliefs that women are valued far less than men and deserve what happens to them, right? The social, the economic deprivation of women.
Yes. But Bonnie, this, in a sense, this is a mixed blessing or curse, as the case may be, because your funding has been flatlined for most of your existence, over 20 years now at the agency, and so we're encouraging women to come forward. You can barely keep up with, those who have been victimized already. What is this going to mean for you?
What is happening now is that we are getting a large number of calls of women who are coming forward just to get support. And I think we share with them some very realistic information that, Antonia is right, that it is a long process. And you really actually have to have the ability to withstand that process. And it's not always victim friendly. It's not an easy process to go through if you want to go through the court system. So, but regardless of your decision to go forward and report to police and have any court case, you are entitled to receive support. We find, it's very difficult for us. We find our name, Victim Services Toronto, and very often women who have been sexually assaulted come back to us and say, you really should change your name because, yes, I was hurt once, right? And I was victimized, and that really took me a long time. But I can say now today, I'm a survivor. And it's a rejection of that victim mentality that women come forward and say, I survived this horrible ideal, and I'm not going to let you victimize me for the rest of my life. And it really is quite empowering. The difficulty for us is that we work with people in all sorts of situations, family members of homicide victims who feel, what, I am a victim. And in the moment, it really lends that legitimacy that you're not at fault, particularly for...
because this is one of the myths, of course.
That's right.
Is that women somehow are complicit in their own abuse. And that's part of it. Jeff, do you address that? I mean, you run an incredible educational program, and we've had you out to speak in various venues that I've been at. What are you hearing from, say, high school boys? Let's use them as a target group when you go out to speak to them. Do you still hear some of the old stereotypes?
Oh, absolutely. I think that what's really exciting is I think there is genuine change and a shift in the culture, but the reality is more often than not, still some, again, as I mentioned, these traditions of perspectives of the issue are handed down, and young men will speak around the language of victim blaming and, what was she doing, putting the onus on her, and where the focus needs to shift towards, our behavior as men and young men, as far as why we do what we do, or really having honest conversations with ourselves around our own attitudes and behavior, and then how we hold each other accountable as men and young men in our interactions, not just in a romantic sexual nature, but also in our workspaces, in classrooms, by the water cooler, in the locker room, etc. So I think it's a 24/7 conversation that for men and young men, they're starting to create their more and more awareness around the issue and awareness around the reality for women and girls and people who identify as female, but also awareness of how we need to step up in our responsibility around why these things are happening and put the focus more on our behavior and our attitudes and as well as what we're doing to hold our friends and colleagues accountable.
Yeah. Antonia, to get back to you, I mean, one of the sad realities, of course, is that really in talking to women, I'm a boomer, baby boomer, and in talking to women of my generation, I don't think I've met anyone yet who I know well enough that would indulge in this kind of conversation or
you're talking to one.
Exactly. I don't know anyone who's not been sexually assaulted. I mean, that's the simple reality. When you start talking to women of a certain age and who've lived long enough on the planet, and so really, part of me just gets so tired of having this conversation year in, year out. I mean, Bonnie works the field, Jeff. I can't imagine, constantly talking about this because it feels like it never goes away. And the only hope that I think you and I had, Antonia, and Bonnie from, generations past, was that it would change with younger people. I have a son and a daughter myself, and talking to my daughter, I can see that if anything, it might be getting worse. I don't know. What do weigh in, Antonia? What do you think? What are we going to do?
I think it is getting worse. It is getting worse, and it's getting better. It's getting worse in the sense that there are so many other ways that a young woman or even a young man can be, sexually violated, and whether it's by having their photographs, kids are exchanging photographs, like all kinds of things, right, put on the internet and exposing them in that way to bullying and mockery and the kind of thing that, would drive them to suicide, as we've seen. So in that sense, I think technology has made it worse, especially now with, porn, and I mean not the kind of porn that I wouldn't even call it porn that you and I grew up with, Playboy magazine, that kind of thing, but really, hardcore porn available just with a couple of clicks. So, and that's the way I see it as being worse. In the way I see it as being better is that we are a more open society, and I think women are less likely to blame themselves, or at least I hope so. When I was growing up, and I'm going to assume that you had the same thing, that you were told by your mother or whoever, don't leave your drink on the table, don't smoke other people's OPs, other people's cigarettes, because who knows what they would put in it. Don't go out at night alone. Don't do this and don't do that. Whereas now, if you were to say all those things, you would be accused of victim blaming. So, and also when I was, in my teens and early 20s, there was no such thing as a rape crisis center. That opened up in Montreal, my hometown, in around 1974, and I know because I did a story when it opened up. So there were no resources of any kind back then. We called it, for example, violence against women or domestic abuse or, wife abuse. We called it wife beating. It was just like wife beating. Let's discuss wife beating as if it were common, which obviously it is. But, the conversation has changed, and I think that young women are more aware. And in that sense, I think things are better. There are policies in place in most places, such as, corporations and colleges, and hospitals, whether they are used to report sexual harassment or not is another matter. But unfortunately, we have this situation right now in the House of Commons in Ottawa, where we're seeing that there's no policy at all in place to protect MPs. So there's good news and there's bad news.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, getting back to the other side of the coin here, with I think young men, certainly growing up, partly it's wrapped up in an identity issue for what is a man, and you're engaged in a campaign around that. What is it to be a man? Because most boys, I think, still have some kind of weird, and this is media generated, of course, some kind of bizarre, sense of what it is to be a man and what is it to be a man sexually, and it's almost always to be the assertive one and the aggressor in some kind of way. Speak to that in your program.
Well, that's absolutely the conversation that we're trying to have to create awareness around this side for us as men and young men is, here in 2014, the formula for manhood is still to prove you're not a woman. And so much of this is really around the identity of, again, devaluing anything deemed feminine. So love, empathy, emotional literacy. These are things that we want to encourage in human beings. These are human traits. When we deny those things to men and young men, we deny ourselves as men and don't give each other permission to explore those sides of our humanity. It creates a space where we only encourage aggression, anger, those sorts of emotions. And that leads to so for example, if you imagine like an emotional toolbox, the only tool in that box is a hammer. and that's how we solve problems in our relationships and then romantic relationships, etc. as we get older. And we're not taught how to navigate life being successful in relationships, how to even be a friend to a colleague, and then how to be in a relationship, how to navigate our planet and our world, seeking consent in everything we do. Because as you mentioned, the idea is to be the man, to be the alpha male, to not have to ask for help. You are the solution, not the problem.
To not ask for anything.
Yeah,
basically.
exactly. And the thing is that if you don't have someone to ask those questions growing up, phrase I use is maps to manhood, then you're left on your own. You see what you see on TV and in music and films and what you see successful in the neighborhood or your friends or your big brother or whatever. And if they're not positive examples, you go down that path. And we want to encourage men to really think about these conversations, and we can talk about it more, but a conference that we're holding in a few weeks is called What Makes a Man, and it's a 2-day discussion event to explore some of this stuff around how we need to have more conversations about how we create ideas of manhood and how those affect
Is this happening
everyone.
in our schools? I mean, without
I
white
think-
ribbon pushing it? I mean, do you think there's something happening educationally in our schools about this, Bonnie?
We actually do a program. It's called TEAR, and in fact, we should link up because TEAR stands for Teens Ending Abusive Relationships, and it really is a very powerful workshop. We reach over 10,000 students a year. We have approval to do it in any TDSB school, also the Catholic school boards as well, and we even sometimes go into private schools. It's a powerful workshop around how do you develop healthy relationships? What are the signs of unhealthy relationships? What are some of the warning signs? What to do if you're in an abusive relationships? Power and control is really one of those key issues, those key alarm bells that people should be thinking, this isn't the relationship that I necessarily want to pursue. So if the person is trying to isolate you, is feeling jealous. So we go through some of the symptoms of unhealthy relationships and actually what the results can be in abusive relationships. This is a very powerful toolbox, but we can also do a better job, and that's why I think we should link up in terms of addressing the boys in the audience and what their responsibilities are, and how they have to view things in terms going forward, so that they can develop healthy relationships as well. I just want to make one particular point. We talk about violence against women and how widespread that is, and you've said, I don't know anyone who hasn't been sexually assaulted, and the truth of the matter is that more than 50%, I think it's about 54% of women in Canada will experience assault or sexual assault within their lifetime, so more than half. But far more disproportionate are Aboriginal women, women with disabilities, right? Who, sometimes the education piece is not for them, but when you realize how systemic it is for women with disabilities and Aboriginal women's, I think it has to go beyond education, and we have to put in real social safeguards to ensure that women are safe.
Absolutely, Antonia. I'm going to get back to you on the economic front. If you can't be safe from violence, oppressive violence, if you can't earn the same as a man, and we still don't. We earn about 72 cents on the dollar, still low these many years later. And of course, we know we don't have childcare that we can access, and that truly is an issue of equality. So really, is the answer to violence against women really about social determinants? Antonia, where do we go with this?
Well, there's a number of things just before I go ahead with that. And there has been a decided drop in violence against, well, first of all, in violent crime overall, but also in violence against women since around 1990. If you look at the Statistics Canada charts of death, of murder by firearm, there was a huge drop from about 1990, from about 11 women per million population to about 5 or 6 until 1994, and I can only, ascribe that to tightened up gun legislation in the wake of the Montreal École Polytechnique massacre. So there's that. There's also, the rise of women's independence that happened at the same time. Women entering the workforce, women getting better education, women getting better jobs, that kind of thing. So there's no question that there is a connection. As for social determinants and economic determinants, there's been study after study that's proven that women in rural situations, just to pick an example, are especially vulnerable. And one of the reasons they're vulnerable is that they have no resources, in the sense of they don't have outside jobs, they don't have outside connections, they don't have a place to go. They're kind of trapped on the farm, shall we say, very often with men with rifles for hunting, those are being used. We know this for a fact, to terrorize them, whether or not they get fired off or not. So in terms of women's independence, we not only need pay equity, we not only need child care, but this government, for example, and I'm talking about the federal government, has been not only cutting resources on the helping end, but has also been making it very difficult for women to be independent. The recent move on income splitting, to me, encourages women to step out of their jobs and stay home. The child tax credits and that sort of thing, that's not child care. That's ridiculous. That's beer and popcorn money, as it was once put. So you have less violence against women in countries where there is more equity for women, and the less equity there is, the more violence there is. And it's a very simple equation. And when I look to this government in Ottawa, I can only see bad news in the recent past and more bad news to come.
And even provincially, Bonnie, you could speak to that. The funding has been cut from, over $200 per victim down to tens of dollars over the years in terms of real assistance. And of course, housing is outrageous. We have 70,000 families waiting for affordable housing and 1 in 3 children using food banks in the city. And on that cheery note, we're going to take a break and pay some bills. But when we come back, I want to talk about the fact that most of these guys, we're not talking about stranger danger here. We're not talking about men you love, men you respect, men in your life. We're going to talk about those men and other things related to this in just a couple of minutes. And by the way, you can tweet me and you can call in 416-946-7000 if you have a question or comment. We're talking about, of course, the fallout from the John Ghomeshi nightmare and what it means for women and women keeping safe. Let's pay some bills.
Perera's Missing Records is now inside.
Thank you for your support during our recent...
Genres include indie, jazz, funk, blues, punk, country, alternative, classic collectibles, and other rarities. Check out our $5 bin and our Just In bin. Conveniently open every day from 10 to 10, 1556 Queen Street West, in the heart of Queen Street, Parkdale.
Thank you for your support during our recent membership drive campaign, The New Sound of Your City. CIUT 89.5 FM is here because of you. The grand prize draws are coming up on November 27th, so be sure to pay your pledge or donate today so you get entered into 8 grand prize draws. You could win a Sony e-reader, a Samsung Galaxy S4 Mini, a books and tea prize pack, tickets to the Mervish production of The Heart of Robin Hood, tickets to see Dimitri Martin live, a 1-month pass for yoga at Nirvana Spa, a Samsung GS5 active mobile phone, or a Samsung Galaxy tablet S10.5. Pay your pledge or donate through our secure server at www.ciut.fm or call 416-946-7800. And again, thank you.
Did you know there are now 8 different ways in which you can listen to your favorite programs on CIUT? From Barrie to Buffalo, Kitchener to Cobourg, you can pick us up on 89.5 FM. We also stream online at www.ciut.fm, on Rogers Digital Cable, Channel 946, Channel 970 on Bell 5 TV, Star Choice Satellite offers CIUT on Channel 826, and you can pick us up on the TuneIn Radio app and under College and Campus Radio on iTunes. Finally, you can listen or download CIUT program archives at ciut.fm. CIUT 89.5 FM, delivering the new sound of your city everywhere.
And welcome back. You're listening to Three Women. I'm your host, Sherry DeNovo, MPP Parkdale High Park. I've got Bonnie Levine, Executive Director of Victim Services in the studio. I've got Jeff Perera of White Ribbon Campaign in the studio. Very first man ever on Three Women. You're an honorary woman today, Jeff, just because. And on the phone, we've got Antonia Zerbisias, who is, of course, retired and well-respected journalist. And we just left off talking about, actually, as the ads are playing, Bonnie and I were talking about the continuum of violence, really. First of all, we have to really state that it's not just about getting hit. It's not just about getting beaten up, because often certainly I've seen over the course of my life, people who are in abusive relationships it's verbal. I mean, that's usually when you get help because there's bruises to show for it. But I mean, usually this is after a lot of emotional abuse, a very unequal relationship, and all the things we've been talking about. But also it's usually, it's not stranger danger we're talking about here. It's usually someone you love, respect, live with often, and you don't want to see that person in jail necessarily. You don't, because partly you're dependent on them financially in some ways, but also you're dependent on them emotionally. I mean, this is somebody you love, and they're not always like that. We've all seen the issues. I mean, I used to work in Nellie's and Margaret Fraser House in past life, and, it was the constant pattern of, the woman who'd, come in, and then, of course, she's back with the guy 2 days later, and then she's back in. That'd be sort of the frequent flyer. So maybe we can speak to that. Bonnie, do you want to weigh in? Because you're on the front lines here.
Well, I think it's very difficult, right? Because we talked about the economic deprivation that women experience, right? We're not in the corporate boardrooms where our pay hasn't risen to the extent that male pay has risen. And I do agree that things will change. The more equity women experience in our society, the more ability we have to stop violence against women in all of its forms. But of course, people are most at risk of suffering violence from someone that they know. Even in terms of sexual violence, we see, and we do see patterns over the summer that reports of sexual assaults go up, and stranger sexual assaults with the summer months, right? And people sleeping with their windows open. So there becomes more opportunity. But, on campuses, once September rolls around and on all the university campuses and Frost Week and everyone's getting to know each other, we also see a lot of women being sexually assaulted at those times as well. And women who come forward to us say, I wasn't really sure, and my classmates, I told a trusted friend, and she asked me, do you really want to just ruin his life for that? So it's very difficult to come forward immediately as soon as you say something. There's always a reason not to. Mm-hmm. So.
And Antonia, do you really want to ruin his life for that? There's a good line. The guy you love, the guy you live with, the guy you married to, the guy who you've committed to, and he's 90% of the time, it's okay, and it's that 10%, or the 10% becomes 15%. What about that?
Well, I think it depends on the situation, and it's impossible to give you an answer that applies to everything. I will say this, however, that if it's a guy that you've just met in Frosh Week or that kind of thing, and his daddy is a rich lawyer, for example, and you don't have the same kind of background or resources, just the threat of reporting it could probably stop him from hurting somebody else. And I wish that every campus in Canada had a place where young women could go, and it's my understanding from having seen the research that Jamie Poisson at the Star is now doing, that the campuses are not doing that as a whole. I think that It's really hard if you're economically dependent on a man. I think it's really hard if you know he's going to hurt you if you leave. Many women are killed the moment they leave the abusive partner. It's a very dangerous time. So it's really hard to give an answer. It depends on the individual case, where that woman is, how it happened. But let's make it clear, marital rape is against the law.
Absolutely, and that's an important message to get out there. Jeff, is there hope for guys? Because obviously 50% of women are being abused. There's a whole lot of men out there doing it. What happened? Do you deal with men who have been abusers, see that they have been abusers, are willing to own up, admit it, and move on? Is there a moving on?
I think that there are signs of more and more men recognizing their role around the issue. And again, something that came up earlier, it's important to point out, is that it's not the monster hiding in the dark alley or in the bushes. It's that friendly face that you see by the water cooler or on campus or where you work, live, worship, and study, in those circles. And I think it's important for us to recognize that when we talk about the extreme end of the spectrum with physical sexual violence and how there's such a wide spectrum of it around behavior and attitudes and words we use and emotional abuse, etc., I think that men need to really recognize, you talked a lot about how, most women will know, most women that they know have experienced some sort of abuse and violence, but how many men can say that? So I think men need to ask the question, am I a safer space? And how can I strive to be a safer space? So by that I mean that you're someone that the women and girls in your lives can come to and trust, and you're building and earning that trust every day in your actions, what you do when no one's looking, never mind when everyone's looking, and that you're someone that they can, if you're a survivor of violence, you've experienced violence, that this person can support you and believe you. So it's being that person, but also being a safer space in that when I walk into the locker room, the classroom, the boardroom, that people know I'm not going to stand for not just necessarily jokes and kind of attitudes and whatnot, but also the behavior and the treatment that's derogatory, devaluing women and girls. So I think it's a call to men. It's a wake-up call, and it's time for, especially in so-called progressive left-leaning spaces where it's assumed, and we unfortunately had this radio personality that a lot of people in the country respected and trusted, realizing that it's not enough. We have to hold ourselves as men to a higher standard, that we can do better. And it's not just what we say or being able to quote bell hooks. It's actually living that life and walking the walk.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And sort of just looking ahead, in terms of the educational programs in schools, everything we're doing with the young men and young women, and it's interesting that my daughter's response, as we were talking to this about around the dinner table, who's an adult now, said, why don't women come forward, said it's, it wasn't, shame, horror, and blame kind of language. It was time-consuming, embarrassing, humiliating. Those were the words she used. Time-consuming, embarrassing, and humiliating. Antonia, have you heard this in response to your hashtag?
Yes. Sandy Garasino, who is out on the West Coast, wrote a really important piece for Huffington Post. She's a former Crown prosecutor out there, and she detailed all the kinds of things that women are being asked if they ever get to court. And we know that very few women ever get there. I mean, I think it's from every 1,000 reported, only three. There are only 3 convictions, and in between there's very few that get to court, as I just said. But once a woman is on the stand, she is interrogated like she is the criminal, and everything comes up, whether she's ever smoked pot, or what was she wearing. The only thing they can't ask anymore is her past sex life. But anything is fair game. Even whether she's taking antidepressants becomes an issue. So who needs to go through that? And the other thing is that it not only is it time consuming, it's expensive. If you're a young woman and you're in a job where you don't have the kind of job security, or union protection where you can go, to court to pursue this kind of thing, you're not going to get paid. And on top of that, you may need a lawyer. So it just goes on and on.
And sometimes I think because of the number of women and the extent of what we're talking about in terms of violence and assault on women, and could be verbal as well as physical, it's not so much that you want to go to court anyway and that you want a conviction, you want to put somebody in jail. You need somebody to believe you, and you need some help and some counsel, and you need to be listened to. And I know many women's experiences that nobody believes them, especially if the guy's John Ghomeshi or somebody with a profile. Bonnie, you come across that, I'm sure.
Yeah, and not only do people not necessarily believe, but then they become the targets for public bashing in a way, and it's very difficult to move forward. So now you've just been through a horrific event, and publicly you are being held. I'm looking for the word.
Yeah, hostage. Yeah, you're
Doubted.
hostage. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
But you're seen as the awful one, the bad person, the person who is a liar, who's making things up, who's attention seeking, all those things.
Interesting that in the John Ghomeshi instance, and I thought this was the turning point, really, you started to see on Twitter and on Facebook people saying, well, you can't accuse, he's innocent until proven guilty. And then someone started saying, and it caught on, yeah, but the women are too. The women are innocent until proven guilty as well. Antonia, you wanted to weigh in?
Yeah, I wanted to weigh in because what had happened in the day or so previous to our launching the hashtag was the actress Lucy Decoutère had stepped forward, and the Star had her picture on the front page, and she was sort of being challenged, well, why didn't she report, that kind of thing, and the hashtag I Believe Lucy started, but it didn't seem to have the same resonance as the resonance that it should have, and I included it in my very first tweet, been raped, never reported. It was as if people, well, no, it was. Some people were actually, accusing these women of some giant conspiracy to bring down Gian Ghomeshi. And I think it's also important to note that, from what I understand, research shows that there are very, very, very few false accusations that are ever made against men in the cases of sexual assault, because it's just not worth the hassle. And if it's sexual harassment in the office, I mean, who needs the gossip, the threat to your job, the process? I mean, why go through it when we know that if it really happens, you're still going to suffer? So why even set up a false situation?
One of the sad realities, I didn't come from the second wave of feminism, but, the sisterhood is powerful slogan, I remember it well. One of the sad realities is often it's women in your life that don't believe you. Often in cases where there's abuse in the family, it's women closest to you that don't believe you, that also love this person or respect him or fear him, right?
And may also be abused by him and just don't want to let that out.
Yeah.
And in fact, just to bolster some of your points, men have the resources to actually take defamation of character suits against women who come forward and do speak out, and so there's even more reason. I love the idea that there's a forum where women can get counted without having to go through a process that they may not be ready or prepared to go through, but they can come forward in a way and say, it did happen to me, and get counted, because we need to show that this does happen, and it happens in great numbers, and most women do not report. So, and I love your hashtag, I have to say, it's phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. And the hashtag, of course, is Antonia Zerbisias, who's on the line, our journalist, and Bonnie Levine in the studio, who's ED of Victim Services, if you just tuned in, and Jeff Perera from White Ribbon Campaign. And I'm your host, Sherry DeNovo, MPP Parkdale High Park, and this is Three Women. And if you just just tuned in, you've missed a bunch, but there's still time if you'd like to tweet. I'm getting some a lot of sort of Twitter comments, no particular comments or that haven't been made here, or questions. But Jeff, to get back to you, okay, so if a lot of guys a lot of women we know have been sexually assaulted, a lot of guys have been sexual assaulters. How does that make you feel wandering around with the guys you know?
Well, this is the thing, right? It's really having that moment of recognizing, when we look at these numbers, these statistics, clearly there are some perpetrators and violent men who have numerous women that they've assaulted. But the idea, again, is that it's not just a handful or a very small group of men, that it's, again, men that we know, men that we trust. And I think for us as guys, it's not a conversation that's directly in our face, because we don't really recognize this privilege that's so invisible for us. So just for example, like, one of the things I talk to men about is, as an example to understand how privilege plays out every day, just on campus, is how we go to the bathroom, right? As men, we just go to the bathroom. Doesn't matter what time of night. We don't check the stalls. We don't go to the safe bathroom, the one that's well lit. These are things that women think about, and it's not that women walk around in a state of victimhood, but they walk around in a state of mindfulness because they're forced to from an early age. And I think when guys start to have those wake-up moments, it's thinking about my own internal behaviors and actions, but then thinking about our colleagues and friends, coworkers, roommates, or whatever the case is, and teammates, and really wanting to hold them more accountable. I was very thankful to be in Kingston for a few days, and one of the reasons I went was the team leader of the men's rugby team at Queen's invited us to come out. And it wasn't in reaction to an assault, it was being proactive. He said, I want to bring someone from White Ribbon to come talk about these issues with our team and with our guys. And to me, that's someone it's not about praising men for just doing a good thing, because that's what we're supposed to do, is just be good people. But I want to acknowledge him and recognize that that's an example of what we need more and more, is men to be proactive and say, what can I do? What can we do? And to recognize that there's probably guys in this space that need to hear this stuff, and that we need to call in or call out, but there's something that we need to do. We need to step up and play that role.
There was, of course, yet another thing on social media that was making the rounds, and that was the young woman, I think it was in the streets of New York, who just filmed what she went through every day walking down the streets. And I remember this very well as a young woman, that you absolutely could not walk from A to B anywhere in the city of Toronto in those days without getting catcalled, ogled, something. But then the reaction to that, I was thinking about it, was a young white guy did the same thing, cataloged it, and of course it was a joke, but people rushed out, offered him jobs, gave him free cups of coffee, but talking about white male privilege. Antonia, we've got just a few minutes left, and we're kind of summing this up. I mean, this is a moment, and you helped create that moment with your hashtag and the response to it. And Bonnie's absolutely right, and kudos to you. This gives women a chance to speak up. And interestingly enough, I think that must also have an effect on the men in their lives who are reading those hashtags and what they're saying, and we're reading those Twitter tweets and what they're saying. But so it'll have a ripple effect, no doubt, and the ripple effect will be nothing but positive. But what next? Like, how then do we somehow make a difference? I'm thinking even generationally, because how do we change this for our grandchildren, if not our children? Antonia?
I wish I had the answer.
One would be good. Any.
But I do want to say this, that in terms of Twitter, which is often a horrible space for women with opinions, and a very misogynist place with the trolls and the anonymous barbs and the rape threats that inevitably come up when you have something to say. The usual bad guys have been very, very quiet, and there has been very little of that kind of outright misogyny and trolling that we've seen in the wake of Gamergate, for example, when gamers went after women in the gaming community, which to me is a significant turning point. Because I'm seeing, or what I'm interpreting it as, is men going, whoa, I didn't realize it was this bad. Are all these women lying? Maybe not. Maybe I should shut up and listen for once. Maybe I shouldn't contribute to this. And it's a kind of, consciousness raising, as we might have said once upon a time, that has sort of reverberated through our society, which to me is an amazing thing. And it's the first move to a wave of change.
You're a media person, Antonia, and this is one thing we didn't have a chance to get into, but certainly where young women are concerned and the image portrayed of women that women feel they have to live up to, things are way worse than when you and I grew up.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's wild. I mean, and I'm not just talking about, music videos. I'm just talking about the airbrushed reality of what we're supposed to...
It's even worse than that. I mean, there was a W magazine, not a W magazine, an interview magazine spread just 2 months ago with Nicole Kidman being represented as, in her Prada, whatever, being raped in a park. Okay. That's a fashion spread.
Yeah, this is so it continues. I mean, it continues, and this is what our young men and young women are reading and watching and thinking this is what they're supposed to emulate, and if they, we one day want to, wear Prada and get raped. I mean,
well, it's
that's
not
the
that
message.
you emulate it, but it kind of normalizes it, and it shouldn't be normalized.
Yeah. So media, what do we do about it? Any last thoughts, Antonia?
Unfortunately, sex, or even violent sex today, sells, and we see it everywhere, from American Apparel ads to the dead hooker sort of trope in every primetime crime show. It just goes on and on.
Oh, yeah.
And on.
I mean, that's, Law and Order, Special Victims Unit always opens with a dead woman, basically. You get really kind of tired of just seeing dead women all over your screens. Bonnie, moving forward.
Moving forward, we always have to push for social justice issues, right? So we can never be complacent. We need to be able to address equity until we achieve equity for women, for racialized groups, for Aboriginal peoples. We will continue to see this, and so the only way through it is to push for social justice and equity.
And in terms of Aboriginal women, of course, we shouldn't go off air without mentioning that, yes, we are calling for a national inquiry into missing and murdered Aboriginal women. And quite frankly, I think it should be provincial, too. There's nothing stopping every province from doing their own inquiry. We're almost half of Canada, and then province of Ontario, we could be doing something here. But we're looking at issues of racialization as well, which are critical in this, too, because there are many layers of oppression. So what about victim services? What can we do once something terrible happens? What can we do to help you out?
Oh, well, actually, you can refer to us. You can say if you need assistance and you're not ready to report, you can go to victim services. Anyone can actually call. I want to say, in terms of engaging in those discussions and pushing social justice forward, part of it is this show, and I love the fact that Jeff Perera is here because, it's 3 women, but it's 4 feminists.
That's right, which is very important, that you don't have to be a woman to be a woman's ally, absolutely.
Right.
And we would hope, we who have sons, that they are the new breed of man out there. And that's why this, I think, is so distressing, is because, we thought Gian Ghomeshi was a new breed of man. What happened? Jeff, weigh in.
Yeah, well, it's time for us as men to be present with this conversation and not just let it just disappear, and to be really recognizing the role we have to have the conversation amongst ourselves as men in our spaces. And really quickly, White Ribbon, that's the work we're trying to do. And our conference to find out more is whatmakesaman.org. And it's a 2-day space to have those conversations. The idea is to keep the conversation going.
So when is this conference? How does it work?
It's going to be Friday, November 21st, Saturday, November 22nd, happening here in Toronto. Day 2 will be live streamed. Our keynote is actor Terry Crews, former NFL player and TV star and actor, and he talks really frankly about his journey to becoming a better man. He doesn't sit here and say that I'm the evolved man, as I'm trying to figure it out. And he wants men to join him on that journey, and that's what we're about too.
And where is it? Where's it going to be?
Day one's going to be happening at the Alumni Theatre, which is the home for the oldest theatre company in Toronto, ran by women for women, which is a really exciting venue. Day two will be at the Glen Gould Studio here in Toronto. So again, to find out more, it's whatmakesaman.org, and we hope to see folks there.
So he's keynote, and then are there workshops, or what else is happening?
Many different discussions
Right, okay.
Around gender imbalance in tech and STEM startup culture, how men need to be more relationship successful, going from boyhood to manhood. These are discussion sessions that happen with panels, and we encourage the online audience and the in-person audience to join us in the discussion.
Hopefully this is live streamed. Is CBC covering it?
We are holding it. It's going to be through the CBC stream services.
Good, because I suspect that the people who really need to hear it will not be the people in the room at a conference like that. But that's what we're used to in all of our work, wherever we are. So it's good that it's going to get out there, because it really, really needs to. Well, I just want to thank everyone here, and I especially want to thank our tech, Dietrich, who jumped in last minute. We had to change studios. One of the joys of live radio here. And thank you all of those who are out there in the Twitter sphere for tweeting as you do. Antonia, give a plug for your hashtag one last time, because it's so important that women keep using that.
Been raped, never reported.
Yes, so here's your chance. You don't have to drag somebody you care for through the court system. You don't have to drag yourself through it. You just need to put it out there and keep the conversation going, which is what this is all about. I want to thank Jeff Perera from White Ribbon Campaign. I want to thank especially Bonnie Levine from Victim Services, who's been toiling away out there for years and years and years, and finally got some media attention because of all of this. And I thought if there was one bright spot in all of this, it was that seeing Bonnie's face on CP24. So that's all good, because boy, does she need some funding. So I've been trying to fight for that at the provincial level for forever and a day. If you want to volunteer too, that's an organization that runs on volunteers. Yes,
Can
Bonnie.
I give our number?
Yes,
so
please.
It's anyone who wants to call for support or to volunteer or to donate, 416-808-7066.
And for support doesn't mean that you necessarily want to go through the court system. Just if you need somebody to talk to, somebody who's going to listen to you, and somebody's going to believe you. That's what it's all about. Thank you so much for listening in. If you want to contact me between sessions, you can do that on Twitter at CHERIDINOVO, my Facebook, the same name, and I will always respond to you. I run my own social media, so it's me you're talking to. Yes, you are. And till next week on Three Women.